Back to lecture number 77. Today we are talking about topic 8.3, the Red Scare. We have one theme, and that is American national identity. So one learning objective, that is explain the causes and effects of the Red Scare after World War II. And the Red Scare was a period after World War II in which the United States believed that we were in danger of being infiltrated by communist spies. So at first, Americans debated policies and methods designed to expose suspected communists within the United States. This happened in several different ways. Government is trying to set up policies to find out if there are currently communists in the government and ways to oust them from the government. So to begin, President Truman is pushed by the new Republican majority in Congress to set up loyalty review boards. And this happens from 1947 to 1950. Now the federal government has the power to investigate its own employees and make sure that they're not part of any communist groups or any subversive groups similar to communist groups. And this goes on for 3 to 4 years. The government is forcing new employees to take a loyalty oath when they are first hired, saying that they are going to work for the federal government, that they're not going to be communists. And it's starting to verge on stepping on some civil liberties. So now we're in some way discriminating in employment by political ideology and beliefs. The Smith Act was a law passed by Congress, and it outlawed advocating the overthrow of the government or being part of any group that advocates for the overthrow of the government. And so therefore, anyone who joined the Communist Party, they were automatically in violation of the Smith Act because the Communist Party wanted to put in place a communist government in the United States. And then this was upheld in the Supreme Court case Dennis et al. Versus the United States. And then finally, the 1950 Internal Security Act outlaws support for the establishment of totalitarian governments. It restricts the movement of communists, and it even authorizes detention camps for people who have been apprehended through the Internal Security Act. And you can see from the propaganda that it seemed like people in the United States were very fearful. They had this idea that if communism took hold in the United States, that would be the end of it. There was also opposition to this paranoia that communists were going to take over. So the poster on the bottom left is actually speaking out against the Internal Security Act, also called the McCarran Act. All right. In the House of Representatives, the House Un-American Activities Committee was active in trying to investigate everyone and anyone that may have ties to communism. They were investigating the Boy Scouts, the Army, Hollywood actors, and anyone who did not testify, they would be shunned by the rest of their industry. This was common, especially in the entertainment industry. Any actors or directors that did not go to Congress and answer the questions that the representatives had for them would be blacklisted, meaning that they would not be hired to do any future films. One of the people who stood up against the House Un-American Activities Committee was the playwright Arthur Miller. He was quite famous during his lifetime, and he even went on to marry Marilyn Monroe for a time. And he wrote the play The Crucible in 1953 as an allegory for what was going on. It was a thinly veiled play that compared the current period to the 1600s Salem witch trials, in which women in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in Salem were being accused of being witches and being hung or killed because of those accusations. Senator Joseph McCarthy is the senator who is active in the other half of Congress. He claims to have lists of communists who infiltrated the U.S. government. Now, the evidence that he claimed he had always changed. The number of communists that were on his list was always changing, and he never really gave any solid or concrete evidence for why he had these suspicions on so many people. Eventually, he gets what he wants, and he is investigating the U.S. Army and the possible infiltration of communists in the Army. These hearings are televised, and Joseph McCarthy is seen as a bully by the public, trying to accuse people of being communists when in all likelihood they were not communists. Eventually, McCarthyism, which is another name for this era of the Red Scare, declines as the economic boom across the country continues. People start to lose interest in who is a communist and who is not, and they are then focusing on the better life that they're able to live, the new house that they've just bought, the new cars that they've bought. All right, so even as both parties supported the broader strategy of containing communism, so the reason why both parties continue to support, to varying degrees, the Red Scare and the search for communists is because these searches did eventually come up with some communist spies that had infiltrated the U.S. government or the U.S. intelligence. So the most famous one that was found by the House Un-American Activities Committee was Alger Hiss. He was a State Department official. He was at Yalta with President Roosevelt, and he allegedly gave Soviets documents from the U.S. government that had official information. Representative Richard Nixon, new to the House of Representatives, was one of the people who questioned Alger Hiss, and through his testimony that he gave to Congress, he had perjured himself, meaning that he lied under oath. He was convicted and jailed for that crime, and Richard Nixon, because of the success of his investigation, is going to gain popularity amongst the Republican Party, leading to his nomination as vice president in the 1952 election. Next, we have Klaus Fuchs, who was an employee in the Manhattan Project, the U.S. efforts to develop a nuclear weapon. And he helped steal technology from the United States and gave it to the Soviets, likely the reason why they were able to develop a nuclear bomb in the 1940s. And then finally, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, they were convicted spies and they were executed for their crimes in giving the Soviet Union U.S. intelligence secrets on technology like radar, sonar, jet engines, nuclear technology. The list goes on. They continued to be disputed. It continued to be disputed whether they were actually spies or not. Their children, who outlived them, continued to swear that their parents were not communist spies. But when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, more information was released, and it showed that they were, in fact, spies for the Soviet Union. All right, and that was it. Here's our recap. The United States adopted several different policies to keep communism out of the country. The tactics of the policies were contrary to civil liberties, and a paranoid witch hunt atmosphere developed in the era of McCarthyism. And finally, the discovery of several high-profile communist spies continued to fuel the Red Scare. All right, thank you so much for coming and watching this lecture. In the next lecture, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the economy after 1945, so please come back for that one. And I'll see you then.